Dolly Levi, you are a damned exasperating woman.
Why, Horace Vandergelder, that is the nicest thing you have ever said to me.
People often ask me if Gene Kelly ever directed any pictures, and that's always a bit of a surprise. And one of the pictures that surprises them most is that Gene Kelly directed Hello, Dolly. The principles had all been set before Gene came to the picture. Barbra was already signed, Walter Matthau was signed, Michael Kidd was signed as choreographer, and they had no director. And so it was David Brown and Dick Zanuck who called Gene into their office. And Gene said by that time the budget was already about $20 million. And Gene said, I can't say yes to this because this isn't the kind of picture that I see doing. In Gene's mind, Hello, Dolly was a very intimate picture. It was more like what he wanted to do was the original Thornton Wilder play, The Matchmaker. But the studio wasn't interested in that. They wanted a blockbuster, and they wanted another Sound of Music. And finally, he said he agreed to do it.
Good morning, Mr. Vandergelder. Mr. Hackle. Mr. Tucker?
Gene loved Barbra Streisand, and he felt that she was a tremendous asset and a great actor. He went to William Wyler, his buddy Willie Wyler, and said, what's she like? And Wyler said, she's great. He said, but she just knows what she wants. And that worked for Gene because that was Gene. And when Gene came out here to Hollywood, he said, I knew what I wanted, and I knew what I wanted to do, and I knew what I had to do.
There, you see, so much for this nonsense about that darling girl hiding a man in her closet. I think we'll just forget you ever said it.
Now, wait a minute.
It's forgotten.
Yes.
Because there's nobody in there.
Yes.
God bless you.
He had great respect for her, and he said she had this innate curiosity that she not only was interested in her performance, but why things worked and how the camera worked and why something would work on stage but wouldn't work in film. And why is that camera there? Why is that light there? And he said she would ask all the questions, and he said, but she would learn and she would remember.
With a head like yours, you should be a rich woman someday.
That's exactly what I had in mind.
Gene was very good friends with Walter Matthau, and Matthau is funny in the picture because he was used to playing a different type of role, and so to play the romantic lead was a bit of a step out of his usual character a bit. And I think he's wonderful. He was a consummate professional, knew his lines, and always did a professional job.
It's no use arguing. I've made up your mind. Here, let me cut your wings.
I don't want my wings cut.
No man does, Horace. No man does.
Casting the rest of the picture was a very arduous task to cast it. He said they tested over 1,500 different people and looked at miles and miles and miles of footage for movies and television. He said what was interesting was how difficult it was to find people who could sing and dance and play comedy. And he said they even considered looking to people who spoke foreign languages because they did all of the English-speaking countries, and it was very hard.
You stand, Mr. Vandergelder?
One of the great choices, I think, for the picture was a young man named Michael Crawford.
It only takes a moment.
The producers didn't want Michael Crawford to sing. They didn't think he had a big enough voice. They thought he had this little tiny, weak voice and it wouldn't come over in the number. And Gene said, I really had to fight on that one, and he insisted. And I think there was a kind of sympathy for Michael Crawford because Gene himself always felt that he had this little weak voice. And he said, I always had to fight and sell songs. And he said, I wasn't anyone who could train someone how to have better tonal quality, but I could teach them little things that would let them put the song over. And he knew that Michael Crawford was going to make that, and well, look what happened to Michael Crawford. He became this, again, this tremendous sensation. And you see that particular number again in a movie like Wall-E, where it becomes the operative number. And I think there's a real sweetness to it and a kind of innocence with Michael Crawford. And one of the great things is that Michael has always been very, very kind in acknowledging Gene's pushing and contribution to his career.
Isn't the world full of wonderful things?
Check with Irene on that. The costumes, check with Irene.
I think the Irene Sheriff costumes are some of the most beautiful things she ever created. Jean had worked very closely with Irene Sheriff on the American in Paris Ballet and knew that they were a great team. And shooting with this Eastman Deluxe film, you've got the richness, the luxury of the glittery gold as she comes down the stairs and singing Hello, Dolly. For the musical numbers, Jean's big thing was always how do you use the camera to capture dance, because you've got a three-dimensional art form and you're suddenly losing a dimension. But he said what you do is that there are a lot of cinematic tricks and things that you can use, and one of the things is just the kinetic energy of moving toward the camera. And so when you pay attention to that and you watch how so many of the figures are actually moving at the camera, and it creates a sense of another dimension. Another thing that he often used and relied on was the use of color and light, and that you can make the bodies appear full-figured with that. So Michael Kidd staged the dance numbers, but Jean staged 3 different pieces. Ribbons Down My Back is more Gene Kelly, and I think It Only Takes a Moment is more Gene Kelly. And the parade scene, which was the extraordinary element, I think, in the movie, and probably the element for which Gene was most proud.
Let's move, people. We're going to lose this light.
This is how Gene himself described creating the parade scene. He said, "We shot it in 3 days. On the first day, all the cameras were hidden behind windows and walls and were picking up cutting shots of the crowd, side angles. We started out with 8 cameras on the first day and 12,000 people. And the second day, we were down to 3 cameras and 3,000. It kept diminishing as the cameras kept moving in closer. We'd eliminate assistant directors, bands, floats, horses, elephants. It's as old as the movies themselves, this method of shooting. Start way back and keep coming in closer and closer and closer until you finally end up on the faces of the principal characters themselves." One time I asked Jean, I said, "Are there any funny stories about the making of Hello, Dolly?" And Jean said, "There was nothing funny about it." It was a very tough job because they were going to shoot on the Hudson River in Garrison, New York. They were going to be there for 6 weeks. They wanted to check with the gentleman who had been the D-Day weather prognosticator to check the weather. And he said, "Oh, no, your schedule's all wrong. You have to turn it upside down because it's set to rain the entire time." So they did turn the schedule, and it ended up raining the entire time they were there. And Jean said it didn't make for a happy time, that they would try to go into a gymnasia and shoot things as best they could. They'd shoot in between rainstorms, and they were just picking up whatever they could. He said the only reason it worked to their advantage is they ended up shooting that entire, what was to have been about a 5-week sequence in about 10 days, because everyone wanted to get out of there so much that they worked overtime, and it was in daylight savings time, and they were willing to start early and work really late, and so they got that done. But Gene just said it was tough. It was tough.
The most successful musical of all time, Hello, Dolly, is being brought to the screen.
The picture was nominated for 7 Academy Awards and won 3. The Best Picture award went to Midnight Cowboy that year instead of Hello, Dolly did not win, but it's kind of hard to think of those two coming up against one another.
Not in a million years, Dolly Levi. You go your way, and I'll go mine.
Gene said what was hard was that you take a big picture like that, you take this very intimate story, and you're going to translate it to this big extravaganza. But what has been nice is to see that the picture has legs, and that the times that I've seen it screened and recently that it really holds up, and audiences feel that there is heart in the picture, and that Walter Matthau against Barbra Streisand works very, very well. This will be seen for generations. This is a movie that will be seen again and again and again and again.